A werewolf romance story. Written by Nini Peters. The autumn wind carried secrets through the ancient pines of Ravenshollow, where shadows danced between moonbeams and whispered of forbidden love. In this remote mountain town, where mist clung to the valleys like forgotten dreams, lived Luna, a young woman whose emerald eyes held depths that seemed to mirror the forest itself. Her grandmother had always told her she was special, different from the other children who grew up in the mountain settlement. But Luna had dismissed these words as the fond ramblings of an elderly woman who saw magic in everything. Luna worked at the town's only bookshop, surrounded by tales of magic and mystery, never knowing she was living in one herself. The shop had been in her family for 3 generations, passed down from grandmother to mother to daughter, along with whispered stories of their ancestors who had supposedly possessed gifts that bordered on the supernatural. Her days were spent arranging dusty volumes and brewing tea for the occasional customer, her nights filled with restless dreams of running through moonlit woods on 4 legs instead of 2. The dreams had started when she turned 21, vivid and so real she would wake with the taste of pine needles on her tongue and the phantom sensation of wind rushing through fur she didn't possess. She would find dirt under her fingernails despite having gone to bed with clean hands, and sometimes, on particularly intense nights, she would discover pine needles in her hair and mud on her bare feet. Her grandmother's old journal, hidden in the back of the shop, contained similar accounts written in faded ink that spoke of women in their family who had experienced strange transformations under the full moon. She thought she was going mad until the night she met Marcus, though later she would realize that madness and magic often walked hand in hand, and sometimes the line between them disappeared entirely. The town had been unusually quiet that evening, as if every living creature sensed something momentous approaching. Even the ever-present mountain wind had stilled to an expectant whisper. He appeared at her shop just as the first autumn storm began to rage, his dark hair dripping with rain, his golden eyes holding an otherworldly intensity that made her breath catch. The storm outside seemed to have been summoned by his very presence, lightning crackling across the sky in patterns that looked almost deliberate, as if the elements themselves were announcing his arrival. He was tall and lean, with the kind of raw magnetism that seemed to pull the very air from the room, and when he moved, it was with a fluid grace that reminded Luna of predators she had only seen in nature documentaries. The moment their eyes met, Luna felt something deep within her chest respond, like a tuning fork struck by an invisible hand. Her grandmother's old stories came flooding back to her, tales of soulmates who could recognize each other across lifetimes, of bonds that transcended the physical world and reached into realms where spirits danced with ancient magic. The very air between them seemed to shimmer with possibility and danger. "I'm looking for something," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones and settle in places she didn't know could feel sound. The words carried undertones of desperation and hope, as if he had been searching for whatever it was for far longer than any mortal man should have to search for anything. "What kind of book?" Luna asked, though she found herself wondering if he was searching for something far more elusive than literature. Her voice came out softer than intended, almost breathless, as if speaking too loudly might shatter whatever spell was weaving itself around them. "Not a book," Marcus replied, his gaze never leaving hers, golden eyes seeming to pierce straight through to her soul. "I'm looking for answers about what I am. About what I'm becoming. About whether there's any hope left for someone like me." Something in his tone, in the desperate edge beneath his controlled exterior, made Luna step closer. She should have been afraid of this mysterious stranger who spoke in riddles and whose eyes seemed to hold centuries of secrets. Instead, she felt an inexplicable pull toward him, as if some invisible thread connected their souls across time and space. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached toward him, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name or understand. The bookshop around them seemed to fade into the background, the familiar scent of old paper and leather bindings overwhelmed by something wild and untamed that seemed to emanate from Marcus himself. It was the smell of deep forests and moonlit nights, of freedom and danger intertwined in ways that made her pulse quicken with both fear and excitement. "What are you?" she whispered, the question slipping from her lips before she could stop it. Marcus closed his eyes, his jaw tightening with what looked like pain that went deeper than flesh and bone. When he opened them again, Luna saw vulnerability there that made her heart ache. "Something that shouldn't exist in your world." Something that brings nothing but danger to anyone foolish enough to care about me. But Luna's world had already shifted the moment he walked through her door, as if reality itself had tilted on its axis and would never quite settle back into place. That night, as the storm raged outside with unusual ferocity, Marcus told her everything. The rain hammered against the windows like desperate fingers seeking entry, and the wind howled through the eaves with voices that sounded almost human in their anguish. He spoke of the curse that ran through his bloodline, passed down from his grandmother who had loved a werewolf and paid the ultimate price for her forbidden passion. She had been a healer in a small village much like Ravenshollow, gifted with the ability to see into people's souls and mend what was broken there. When she fell in love with a creature of the wild, she knew she was choosing a path that would lead to either transcendence or destruction. Marcus was the last of his kind in these mountains, condemned to shift with each full moon, forever caught between human consciousness and wild instinct. For 70 years, he had wandered from place to place, never staying long enough to form attachments, never allowing himself to hope for anything beyond mere survival. The transformation was both agony and ecstasy, a monthly death and rebirth that left him exhausted and isolated, belonging fully to neither world. His grandmother had told him stories of others like them, scattered across the world, most of them hiding in plain sight among humans who would destroy them if their true nature was discovered. Some had learned to control their shifts, becoming powerful shamans and healers who bridged the gap between the mundane and mystical worlds. Others had been consumed by their wild nature, becoming the monsters that haunted humanity's darkest legends. "I came here to find a way to break the curse," he said, his voice heavy with centuries of longing and disappointment. The old stories speak of Ravenshollow as a place where the veil between worlds is thin, where miracles and tragedies are born with equal frequency. But I'm beginning to think some things are meant to remain broken, that some curses are too old and too powerful to ever be undone. Luna reached across the space between them, her fingers trembling as they touched his cheek. His skin was warm, so very human, yet she could feel the wild energy thrumming beneath the surface like a caged lightning storm. "Maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're just different. Maybe the world needs more people who can see it from both sides." Her touch ignited something primal in Marcus, something that had been dormant for so long he'd forgotten it existed. Hope. For the first time in decades, he dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could find peace. Not the peace of death or the peace of a broken curse, but the peace of acceptance, of being loved for exactly what he was. They fell in love the way autumn leaves fall, gradually and then all at once, with a beauty that was both breathtaking and inevitably tragic. Luna would close the bookshop early to meet Marcus in the forest clearing where wildflowers still bloomed despite the approaching winter, their petals defying the season with the same stubborn hope that grew in her heart. Under starlight, he would tell her stories of the world as seen through wolf eyes, of scents that carried emotions and sounds that spoke of ancient magic that most humans had forgotten how to hear. The forest became their sanctuary, a place where they could be themselves without fear of judgment or persecution. Marcus showed Luna secret paths that wound through the mountains, trails that existed only for those who knew how to look beyond the obvious. He taught her to read the signs that animals left behind, to understand the language of wind through different types of trees, to feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet. "When I'm with you," Marcus murmured one night as they lay on a blanket beneath the constellation of Orion, "I feel more human than I have in lifetimes. You make me remember what it means to hope, to dream, to believe in tomorrow." Luna traced patterns on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm. "When I'm with you, I feel like I'm finally awake. Like I've been sleepwalking through my entire life until now." She began having the dreams more frequently, vivid visions of running through the forest with silver fur and heightened senses that made every sound, every scent, every movement a symphony of information. In these dreams, she wasn't alone. Another wolf ran beside her, his coat dark as midnight, his presence as familiar as her own heartbeat. They hunted together, played together, held together at the moon with voices that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. "I think I'm changing," she told Marcus one evening as they walked through the woods, frost crunching beneath their feet. "I think being with you is awakening something in me that was always there, just waiting for the right moment to emerge." Marcus stopped walking, fear flickering in his golden eyes like candle flames in a sudden wind. Luna, no. The curse, it's not supposed to be contagious. My grandmother, she was human when she fell in love with my grandfather, but she never changed. She died human, even though she carried his children. Maybe I was never fully human to begin with, Luna said softly, her breath visible in the cold air. Maybe that's why I've always felt like I didn't quite belong, why I've always been drawn to the wild places, why animals have always trusted me in ways that seemed unusual. She told him about her family's history, the stories her grandmother had whispered about women who could speak to animals, who could sense storms days before they arrived, who could heal with touch and see the future in tea leaves and cloud formations. Her grandmother had called it the gift, and she had always insisted that Luna carried it stronger than anyone in their bloodline for generations. The first time Luna shifted, it happened during the new moon, when Marcus was fully human and vulnerable. She had been walking alone in the forest, thinking of him, when pain unlike anything she'd ever experienced tore through her body. Her bones elongated and reformed, her senses exploded with new awareness, and suddenly she was seeing the world through amber eyes instead of emerald ones. The transformation was terrifying and beautiful, like being torn apart and rebuilt by forces beyond human comprehension. She could hear heartbeats from miles away, could smell emotions as clearly as if they were flowers, could feel the life force of every living thing in the forest as if they were all connected by invisible threads of energy. When she found Marcus at their clearing, now in her wolf form, his face went white with a mixture of awe and terror. Luna's wolf form was magnificent, her silver coat gleaming like moonlight on water, her amber eyes holding all the intelligence and love she possessed as a human. She was smaller than Marcus in his wolf form, but no less powerful, no less wild. "This changes everything," he whispered, reaching out to touch her silver fur with shaking fingers. "You're not just human anymore. You're like me. You're trapped between worlds." Luna couldn't speak in this form, but she pressed against him, trying to convey that nothing fundamental had changed between them. They were still the same souls who had found each other against all odds, still the same hearts that beat in rhythm even when their bodies took different shapes. But Marcus was right. Everything had changed, and not just for them. The town's folklore spoke of werewolves as monsters to be hunted and destroyed, stories passed down through generations of people who had never seen a real werewolf but feared them nonetheless. For generations, the people of Ravenshollow had lived in relative peace, their fear of supernatural creatures existing mainly in stories told around winter fires. Now, with two werewolves in their midst, that fear was about to become devastatingly real. Elena, the town's self-appointed keeper of ancient knowledge and unofficial leader of the most superstitious residents, had been watching Luna with growing suspicion. She was a woman in her 60s who had devoted her life to studying the old ways, the folklore and legends that most people dismissed as fairy tales. She noticed the way Luna disappeared on certain nights, the way she seemed to glow with an inner light that hadn't been there before, the way animals were drawn to her with unusual trust and affection. Elena had been keeping detailed notes in a journal she'd inherited from her own grandmother, a woman who claimed to have witnessed supernatural events that had shaped the early history of Ravenshollow. The journal contained drawings of wolf tracks, pressed flowers that were said to bloom only in places where werewolves had run, and detailed accounts of strange howls heard on moonless nights. "There's something unnatural happening in our town," Elena warned the mayor and the local hunters during a secret meeting held in the basement of the town hall. "Something that threatens everything we've worked to protect. I've been tracking the signs for months, and I believe we have werewolves among us." The hunters, led by a man named Garrett who had grown up on stories of his ancestors' battles with supernatural creatures, listened with growing alarm. They were men who had learned to shoot before they could properly read, who had been raised to believe that their duty was to protect the town from threats that most people couldn't even imagine. Marcus felt the shift in the town's energy like a physical weight pressing down on him. The suspicious glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when he appeared, the way people seemed to avoid both him and Luna with increasing frequency. His heightened senses picked up the scent of fear and aggression, the sound of secret meetings and hushed planning sessions. "We need to leave," he told Luna one night as they stood in their clearing, both in human form, both sensing the approaching danger like animals sensing an earthquake before it strikes. They're starting to suspect. I can smell it on them, the fear and the anger and the need to destroy what they don't understand. I won't run, Luna said firmly, her emerald eyes blazing with determination. This is my home. These people have been my family, my community, my entire world. I won't let fear drive me away from everything I've ever known. They'll kill us if they discover what we are, Marcus replied, his voice raw with desperation and the weight of experience. They won't see us as people who happen to be werewolves. They'll only see monsters, threats to be eliminated. I've seen it happen before, Luna. I've watched good people become killers when faced with something they don't understand. Luna took his hands in hers, her green eyes blazing with a fire that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. Then we'll show them who we really are. We'll prove that love can exist even in the shadows, that being different doesn't mean being dangerous. But love, Luna would learn, was sometimes not enough to overcome centuries of fear and hatred, not enough to bridge the gap between understanding and terror. The hunters came on the night of the winter solstice, when the full moon hung like a silver coin in the star-studded sky and the forest was blanketed in snow that muffled all sound except the beating of hearts and the whisper of breath in the frozen air. Marcus and Luna were in their wolf forms, running through the snow-covered forest with a joy that felt infinite and fleeting all at once. They had been planning to leave Ravenshollow the next morning, to find a place where they could live without fear, where their love could grow without the constant threat of discovery. But they had wanted one last night in their forest, one final run through the woods that had brought them together. They heard the dogs first, their barking echoing through the mountains like the voices of demons, then the shouts of men who had convinced themselves they were heroes in an ancient story. The pack of hunting dogs had been specially trained to track supernatural scents, and they followed the werewolf's trail with relentless determination that spoke of months of preparation. Elena had provided the hunters with detailed maps of the forest, marking the places where she had found evidence of werewolf activity. She had given them silver bullets blessed by the town's priest, ammunition that was said to be the only thing capable of killing a supernatural creature permanently. Marcus and Luna ran as they had never run before, their paws silent on the frozen ground, their hearts beating in desperate synchronization. The forest that had been their sanctuary was now a maze of danger, every shadow potentially hiding a hunter, every sound potentially the harbinger of death. But there were too many hunters, too many dogs, and the forest that had once been their sanctuary was now a trap closing around them with inexorable finality. They were driven steadily toward the clearing where they had first kissed, where they had shared dreams of a future that now seemed as distant as the stars above. They made their stand in that sacred place, back to back, facing the circle of men with rifles and silver bullets, their wolf eyes reflecting the moonlight like mirrors of defiance. The snow around them was pristine and beautiful, unmarked by the violence that was about to unfold. Please, Luna said, shifting back to human form despite her nakedness in the freezing air, her voice carrying across the clearing with desperate clarity. We've never hurt anyone. We're not what you think we are. We're just two people who love each other. Her transformation in the moonlight was beautiful and terrible, her silver fur melting away to reveal pale skin that glowed like marble in the ethereal light. She stood proud and unashamed, her love for Marcus giving her strength even in the face of certain death. But fear had made the hunters deaf to reason, blind to beauty, immune to pleas for mercy. Elena stepped forward, her face hard with righteous conviction and years of accumulated terror. Monsters, she spat, her voice carrying the weight of generations of folklore and superstition. You've corrupted our town with your unnatural presence. You brought evil into our midst. The first shot rang out like thunder in the silent forest, shattering the crystalline beauty of the winter night. Marcus, still in wolf form, leaped in front of Luna with reflexes honed by decades of survival, taking the silver bullet meant for her heart. The impact sent him sprawling in the snow, dark blood spreading like spilled ink beneath the moonlight. Luna's scream of anguish echoed through the mountains, a sound so raw and primal that it made grown men take involuntary steps backward. The sound seemed to come from the very depths of her soul, carrying all the love and loss and fury of a heart being torn in two. She dropped to her knees beside Marcus, cradling his great wolf head in her lap as he shifted back to human form for the final time. "I love you," she whispered, her tears falling onto his face like warm rain, each drop carrying the weight of all the tomorrows they would never share. "I will always love you, in this life and whatever comes after." Marcus's golden eyes found hers, and for a moment, the pain faded from his expression, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. "In every life," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind that had begun to keen through the trees. "In every form. I will find you again." The second shot came quickly, mercifully, ending Luna's grief before it could fully consume her. She fell across Marcus's body, her auburn hair mixing with his dark locks, her blood mingling with his in the pristine snow. Even in death, they held each other, their bodies intertwined in a final embrace that spoke of love stronger than fear, deeper than death. The hunters stood in stunned silence, staring at what they had done. In death, Marcus and Luna looked achingly human, achingly young, achingly innocent. The monsters they had feared were revealed to be nothing more than two people who had loved each other with a passion that transcended the boundaries of species and mortality. Elena knelt beside the bodies, her hands shaking as she noticed something that made her breath catch in her throat. Luna's eyes, now closed forever, still held traces of the emerald fire that had made her so distinctive in life. But around the edges of her irises, barely visible unless she knew what to look for, were flecks of gold that matched Marcus's eyes exactly. "What have we done?" whispered one of the younger hunters, his rifle falling from nerveless fingers. But Elena knew. They had destroyed something rare and precious, something that might have bridged the gap between the human and supernatural worlds. They had let fear triumph over love, and the victory tasted like ashes in their mouths. The town buried Marcus and Luna together in the cemetery overlooking the forest, though they couldn't bring themselves to mark the graves with their names. Years passed, and the story became legend, then myth, then whispered tale told around winter fires. But those sensitive to magic claim that on nights when the moon is full and the snow falls softly through the pines, two wolves can be seen running through the forest of Ravenshollow. One silver, one dark, forever bound by a love that death could not destroy. Some say if you listen carefully to the winter wind, you can still hear Luna's laughter echoing through the trees, still hear Marcus's voice calling her name across the valleys. Their love story ended in tragedy, but their spirits, it seems, found a way to continue dancing together beneath the eternal moon. And perhaps that's the real magic, the truth that the frightened townspeople could never understand. Love, true love that burns bright enough and deep enough, doesn't end with death. It transforms, becomes something even more powerful, something that can touch the hearts of strangers decades later and remind them that even in the darkest stories, even in the deepest tragedies, love endures. The bookshop where Luna once worked stands empty now, but locals swear that sometimes, when the light is just right, you can see two figures standing in the window, holding hands and gazing out at the forest that was both their heaven and their hell. They're waiting, people say, for the world to change enough that love like theirs can exist without fear, without persecution, without the need to hide in shadows. Until that day comes, Marcus and Luna's story serves as both warning and promise. A warning that fear can destroy the most beautiful things in our world, and a promise that love, no matter how it's tested, no matter how it ends, leaves echoes that ripple through eternity. In Ravenshollow, where the mist still clings to the valleys and the wind still carries secrets through the ancient pines, those echoes are strongest of all. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to our channel for more captivating audiobook stories that will transport you to worlds beyond imagination. Your support means everything to creators like us who are passionate about bringing these magical stories to life. Hit that like button if this story touched your heart, share it with fellow lovers of supernatural romance, and let us know in the comments what kind of mystical adventure you'd like to hear next.